for Georgia now. So first, I'll be going through Georgia's roster, and then I'll give you a predicted winner and loser for each game on their schedule. So first of all, Georgia's roster is loaded this season. There are no weaknesses on this team. They're good everywhere. Now they do have certain positions where they're better than others. So starting at quarterback, uh, Carson Beck, in my opinion, is the second best quarterback in the country this season. He's about as good as it gets when he's standing in the pocket. He's so accurate. Uh, now, he's not as good as Stetson Bennett is at running and avoiding pressure. Uh, but I think as a pocket passer, he's even better than Stetson Bennett. And if there's any Georgia fans watching this that are concerned because he didn't play great in the spring game, you're getting worked up for no reason because Carson Beck played great all year last year. So it's obvious that he's going to have another great year playing quarterback for Georgia. And so uh, on the offensive line, they're going to be one of the best in the country again. So even though Carson Beck isn't great under pressure, he's not going to be under pressure much because he's going to have such a great offensive line protecting him again. So they lose Amarius Mims, who was really good for them and went first round. And then they also lose their starting center from last season. But um, Tate Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild are two of the best guards in the country. Uh, mm, Ratledge didn't give up any sacks last season, and he only allowed four pressures, and um, Fairchild only allowed two pressures and also didn't give up any sacks. And they also returned two of the best tackles in the country this season. Ernest Green and Xavier Truss. Green allowed 12 pressures only and only one sack, and then Truss only allowed 19 pressures and two sacks last season. And then the new starting center uh, will be Jared Wilson, who is a four-star recruit that played 204 snaps last season and only gave up three pressures and one sack. Uh, so then at wide receiver, they add in a good transfer receiver from Miami, Colby Young, who had 47 catches for 563 yards and five touchdowns, averaging 12 yards per catch last season. And then they returned Dominic Lovett, who had 54 catches for 613 yards and four touchdowns, averaging 11.4 yards per catch last season. And then they returned Rara Thomas, who didn't do much last season for them, only catching 23 passes and 383 yards and one touchdown catch. But he did average 16.7 yards per catch. And he had transferred to Georgia last season from Mississippi State. And in 2022, he was Mississippi State's best wide receiver, catching 44 passes for 626 yards and seven touchdowns. So I would expect him to get bigger numbers this year. And then they also have Dylan Bell, who played some at receiver as a backup last year and looked good when he was in there, catching 29 passes for 355 yards and two touchdowns and 12.2 yards per catch. So they do lose Lad McConkey at wide receiver, who was their best receiver these past couple of years. but these four should all be good for them at receiver, and then they've got some other options also for depth at receiver. So they don't really have like a Marvin Harrison type of receiver at Georgia right now, but they still have plenty of good receivers to give the ball to. And of course, at tight end, there is no replacement for Brock Bowers. He's just too good of a player to expect to get the same from. But the tight end position, the starter this year will be Oscar Delp, who is a four-star tight end and did play some last year when Brock Bowers was injured and caught 24 passes for 284 yards and uh, three touchdowns, averaging 11.8 yards per catch. I think he'll do a good job for them at tight end. Uh, and at running back, they do lose their top two running backs from last season, Dajon Edwards and Kendall Milton, and those were two really good running backs. But they bring in from Florida Trevor Etienne, who is a really good running back, who these past two seasons as a backup at Florida in 24 games has 1,472 yards and 14 touchdowns, averaging 5.9 yards per carry, and he'll be taking over the starting running back job. And then they have a couple of other four-star running backs to help them out. They've got Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson. So Branson Robinson at last, uh, well, he was hurt last year and didn't play at all, but in 2022, he got 68 carries for 330 yards and three touchdowns, averaging at 4.9 yards per carry. And then Roderick Robinson uh, was a freshman last year and didn't play much, but when he did play, he looked good. Only getting 24 carries for 196 yards, and he got two touchdowns. And the impressive part is he averaged 8.2 yards per carry last season. So Georgia is still going to be one of the best rushing teams in the country this year and have one of the best offenses in college football this year. So on defense, their defensive line returns Michael Williams, who is their best pass rusher. He in 28 games has 63 total pressures and nine sacks and a forced fumble and fumble recovery and 44 tackles. And he's only started 12 games in college, but he'll be starting every game for them on the defensive line this year. And then they've also got Nazir Stackhouse, who is a 2 year starter for them on the defensive line, who has 57 tackles and two sacks and an interception in those 2 years. And then they've got a four-star Warren uh, Brinson, who played in 13 games last year and made four starts on the defensive line and had 21 tackles and uh, nine total pressures and two sacks. And he had five total pressures in the game against South Carolina last season. So I think he's going to be really good now being a all the time starter on the defensive line. And then the other starter is expected to be Ingram Dawkins Tyrone, who is also a four-star, who uh, played in 8 games last year and only had 8 tackles. Didn't make any starts last year, but he did have a forced fumble and he had a sack against Florida, and then two pressures against Missouri. Mm, And at linebacker, they returned their top linebacker, Smile Munden, who uh, has in 26 games 144 tackles, mm, mm, 4 sacks, and 37 total pressures. He's one of the best linebackers in the country. And they have CJ Allen, who as a freshman last year, started uh, 5 games for them at linebacker, and is a 4-star recruit, and had 41 tackles and a sack. And he played in every game last year, I think. And they have Chaz Chambliss, who was a starter for them all season last year at linebacker, coming back. They He had 20 tackles for and an interception, and two pass breakups and 6 total pressures. And then they've also got Jalen Walker, who is a 4-star that will probably get a lot more playing time this year at linebacker, even if he isn't a starter. He played in all 14 games last year and looked good when he was in there. He made 20 tackles, and he had 5 sacks, which was actually a team high last year. And he had 5 total pressures against Alabama in the SEC championship. This will be one of the best linebacker units in the country. And then in the secondary, they do lose two really good defensive backs. They lose Javon Bullard at safety, and then they lose uh, Kamari Lassiter at corner. But they returned their other starting safety from last season, who might be the second best safety in the country, uh, Malachi Starks. Only Caleb Downs, I think, is better than him at safety. Uh, he Last year, uh, well, it was the starter in every game at safety, and in 2 seasons, he has the 121 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 14 pass breakups. And the other starting safety is expected to be uh, Dan Jackson, who in 33 college games has made 6 starts and uh, does have 20 or no 73 tackles for uh, uh, 2 interceptions and two pass breakups. And they return their other starting corner from last season. They get back Dalen Everett, who had 29 tackles and 5 pass breakups and an interception last season. And then the other starting corner is expected to be 4-star uh, Julian Humphrey, who played in 9 games last season and had 11 tackles and a pass breakup. So this secondary should still be really good. Uh, and special teams, they get both specialists back who did a good job for them last year. So Georgia is going to be strong on special teams, and uh, they're also going to have one of the best defenses in the country again, like they always do. So now, moving on to the predictions. So starting with the Clemson game, I made a Clemson video a couple of days ago. So if you want to hear more about that game, I you can watch that video. But I think that Georgia's defense will shut down Clemson's offense almost completely, and uh, Clemson's defense will get worn out in the fourth quarter, and Georgia will pull away and win by around 3 touchdowns. And then next, they play at Tennessee Tech, which of course will be a very easy win. They might beat them as bad as they beat Florida State by 60 points. And then next is Kentucky. So Kentucky will be a decent team, but they're just way behind Georgia. I don't expect this game to be close at all. I think Georgia blows out Kentucky. And then next, they have a big game on the road at Alabama. So Georgia last season had a better quarterback than Alabama did, and a much better tight end and better wide receivers. But Alabama had the better lines, and Georgia got pushed around on both sides. And so Alabama's roster is still going to be good enough to have a chance to beat Georgia. I think this will be a very close game, and I could really see it going either way. But Alabama is going to be weaker in the secondary this year than they were last year. So I do wonder if it is just Nick Saban that owns Georgia or if it's Alabama that owns them. But I kind of think that it was just Nick Saban that owned them. And I do trust Kirby Smart more with the defense than Kalen DeBoer. So I think Georgia gets a really close win over Alabama. So now they will be playing Auburn. So this rivalry game, Georgia has dominated the last 2 decades. They're like 17-3 against Auburn. And when this game is at Georgia, it's usually been a blowout win for Georgia. I know it was close last year in Auburn, but I think this year at Georgia, Georgia will blow out Auburn and win like 34-10. Um, so now they're going to be playing Vanderbilt the second, Mississippi State, who is going to be horrible this year. Georgia will destroy them and beat them by probably like 40 points. So now it will be time for the big game against Texas. And so mm, it will be a road game, and Texas is going to be really good too. They've got no real weaknesses. They've got a really good offense, and they're going to have a good defense. They've got also an elite quarterback with Quinn Ewers. But I do uh, question Texas's secondary when they play against a really good quarterback. I think Carson Beck will give their secondary a lot of problems in this game because Texas and their 2 losses last year were the only 2 times they went against elite quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel and Michael Penix, and they both ate up their secondary. And so I think this will be a really close game, and I was back and forth on my pick for it, but I had to pick somebody, and I think that this will be a fairly high-scoring game. Probably both teams get in the 30s, but I do like Georgia's defense a little bit better than Texas's, and I like Carson Beck a little bit more as a quarterback than Quinn Ewers, so I'm going with Georgia to get a huge road win over Texas. So now it will be time for their rivalry game against Florida, and this has been a blowout win for Georgia the past 3 years, and I think that continues. I think Georgia wins this game by around 3 touchdowns. I think it'll be a score of like 42 to 21. And then now they have another big road game on the road at Ole Miss. So Ole Miss obviously was not prepared to play Georgia last year. Georgia was so much better on both lines, and their pass rush was so much better, and their secondary was so much better. But Lane Kiffin has tried to fix that with the transfer portal this year, bringing in two really good offensive linemen and two really good defensive linemen that are also good pass rushers, and bringing in some really good defensive backs. So I think that with an improved offensive line, Ole Miss will be able to score more on Georgia this time. And with the improvements on defense, I don't think that Carson Beck will just be able to do whatever he wants throwing the ball this time. I don't think Georgia will be able to score on Ole Miss every possession like last season. They will score, I think, in the 30s, but Ole Miss is going to have a improved team this year, I think, from a team that was already good last year, just nowhere close to Georgia. And I think Ole Miss upsets Georgia. Mm, uh, Now you can type in the comments if you want to that I'm a crazy Ole Miss fan that would say this any year just because that's my team. But I really do think that Ole Miss is going to have an elite team this year. And next, they're going to be playing Tennessee. So Tennessee's offense, coached by Josh Heupel, has never been able to do hardly anything on Georgia, and I think that continues this season. They weren't even able to do much on them in 2022 when they had the best offense in the country. And Tennessee's defense will be decent enough to where I think that this won't be a blowout. But I do think that Georgia wins this game by around 14 points. Uh, and then they play Massachusetts, which will be a really easy win. So then now they're going to play Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech's getting better, and they played Georgia somewhat tough last year, but I don't think that'll be the case this year. I think Georgia blows them out and wins by 20 something points. Uh, mm, so I have Georgia at 11-1 overall and 7-1 in the conference, which would give them a good chance to get to the SEC championship game. Now, Georgia's schedule is so tough this year that even though they're probably the best team in the SEC, I think it's unlikely they'll go 12-0. Now, I do think that there is a good chance they could go 10-2 and lose two of those three really tough road games against Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss, or maybe they beat Ole Miss and lose to either Alabama or Texas. Mm, but they're going to be in the college football playoff, no doubt, this year, and have a really good chance to uh, win it all. Now that Nick Saban is retired, of course. If Nick Saban was still around, I would have picked Alabama in that game without even thinking twice. And Georgia's record in conference championship games is not good because they've had to play Alabama in a bunch of those, and they weren't capable of beating them. But we'll see this year if that can change. So that'll be it, and thanks for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.